Genesis chapter 45, as we are closing in on the end of the book. Genesis 45, and the previous chapters, of course, Joseph has been dealing with his brothers. He told them to bring Benjamin to him, and they in turn did. Of course, they did not know who he was at that time, and he knew everything that was going on, so it's a little bit different for us to read the account and to really get the fullness of the effect that it might have had upon them and upon him as well at that time, because we sort of are on the other side, just as we are on the other side of most things that we read in the Bible. Though not everything, there are some things that we're looking forward to that have not occurred yet, and but many things, most things we look on this side of that have already occurred, and this is one, and we see Joseph revealing himself as they have just, he just, planted or framed Benjamin with the silver cup in his sack, and we see how the brothers respond. And we talked about how it would have not have been really that difficult if they did not care, if they did not love in any way. It wouldn't have been that difficult to just let him go, to let him say, oh well, that's just the way it is. They really stuck up for him, that they really went out on a limb there to be able to speak for him. That they didn't know they were talking to their brother. They thought they're talking to like Pharaoh. It's not like they were just saying, well, but no, come on. Don't really do that. They don't know how they're going to respond. For all they knew, they could have just said, oh, fine, I'll just kill all of you. They didn't know what would happen. So those are things to keep in mind and perspective as we read this and as we look at this, the emotion that is intense here, especially in chapter 45, because of what they have experienced. And sometimes we can gloss over that. We can look over that because of its familiarity and also because we're on this side of it. We've already seen everything that occurred. We know how it ends. But verse 1 of chapter 45 of Genesis, Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him, and he cried, cause every man to go out from me. And there stood no man with him while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph, does my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. And Joseph said unto his brother, come near to me, I pray you. And they came near and said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves that you sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and there are yet 5 years, in which there shall be neither earing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. All right, we'll stop there at verse 7. He could, as I was reading there in verse 1, it caused me to think or to imagine, before what's occurring there in the end of 44. We've got the account there that they're saying, no, it's not going to happen. We're going to stay. Take me instead, and don't. This is Judah doing the primary speaking there, the last half of chapter 44, and he said, no, you don't just take me instead of Benjamin, because what Joseph has said was, well, I'll just keep Benjamin, and as I have spoken several times over the last few weeks, I think that's because he had a love for Benjamin. Because they were from the same mother and the divided houses that they would have had and all of that, So even if they gave him Benjamin, it's okay. It's still a win. But now that he sees what has occurred, he could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him, and he cried. Now, when I first read that, I think, Judas just went through this long spiel here saying, no, you can't do that. It's going to kill my dad. If he loses his son, he lost the one son. If he loses this one, I told him he couldn't. I would not lose him. I will take his place instead of then. And then the guy you're talking to, the most powerful man in the whole wide world, as far as you're concerned, starts breaking down crying. And it's like, this thing gets weirder and weirder the more I go along. Okay, first of all, he knows exactly what order we're born in. He gives Benjamin everything he wants. And then Benjamin gets framed for this. And then I'm making the case that I'll stay in place of Benjamin, even though we didn't do anything wrong. And the dude starts crying. And that's like, it's another evidence that it's true. Because who in the world would make that up? Okay, and then here's the next point I'm going to make up. Then he'll just start crying immediately. It's the uneasiness that would have created. Of course, there's a lot of uneasiness here within this account, but, he couldn't refrain himself. And they're probably thinking, what? Judah doesn't make a habit of being the greatest guy in the world, but he did once, but he usually doesn't cause people to cry over his goodness. But then he says, get everybody out of here. Everybody leave. And there stood no man with him while Joseph made himself known to his brethren. He wanted privacy. Some things, obviously, that we talk about, that we speak about, you only want within certain company. That's, something that's fairly obvious, I think. Sometimes you don't want to say certain things. If you're meeting with a group of people and you're discussing decisions that you're making about someone or something, if they may say, now keep that in confidence here. And obviously families will be discussing things that they may not want everyone else to know. But he makes himself known to their brethren. He says, everybody get out. And he wept aloud. And the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard. And, that there's some thought that Joseph was quite a ways away from the house of Pharaoh. So they're like, could it really be possible that Pharaoh really heard, or is that just a messenger going and telling Pharaoh? But then there is also the understanding that the culture and the people, their sentiments of joy or of grief within the culture would be so intense that it would not be uncommon for them to be able to hear it, down at the end of the road or something, because it was so intense. It wasn't like we usually often think of. It's actually quite a bit more open than it has been, but grief especially is something that's very reserved. It's quiet. It's done only maybe a little bit in public, but the vast majority of people's grieving is done in private for the most part. It's very rare for me to walk outside my door, and probably for you too, and to hear somebody just wailing in grief because, I don't know, their son died or whatever, some horrible event, or to be ecstatic with joy. Somebody got married, they're just ecstatic and they're shouting. It's pretty odd, I think, for us to walk outside and for that to occur. I don't know. On my road it is. I think it's probably true on your road as well, wherever that might be. But their culture is quite a bit different. It was intense, no doubt. Whether it was taken there or whether, we don't exactly know how far away he was, so that's another part that plays into it. But, the idea is that the cultures are different. Understand that in that sense and how they would grieve and things of that sort. That doesn't necessarily, of course, apply and say, well, their cultures are different, the truth doesn't matter, and all things like that. We're talking about their grief and the ways they express joy and grief. Just because you express it in a different way doesn't make it bad or doesn't make them bad. It makes them different. And and it says this can be renewed at different times and continues many days according to the vigor of the passion. And sometimes they may cease at all and then begin as suddenly with great shrillness and loudness than one can imagine. So that's what's been examined and seen through the cultures in that time, and not just in 20 centuries before Christ, but all down through. And even today, you can go places where that occurs, where grief is visible and open and out. And that's certainly not all bad. In fact, there would probably be more harm done by keeping it in and reserved, and that creates more problems, actually, the way that we do it probably. But he weeps, and everybody hears. The Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh. Now, notice there again is a distinction between the Egyptians and the house of Pharaohs. We have talked about that before. It is possible that the Pharaoh is not an Egyptian. There were occurrences where the leader of Egypt would be someone of a Semitic type of race, if for lack of a better term, because there's only one race, but a Semitic class of people from those who would come in and sort of like traveling marauders that would conquer. And there was constant fighting, all the countries there, just like there's constant fighting today. So it is possible that he was more of a Semitic type, which of course Joseph was as well, which could factor into the blessing and openness that they received, and would also factor into why they were not received as well in later years. Though all of that could be true even if he was Egyptian. But be that as it may, there's a distinction made there in verse 2. Joseph said to his brother, I am Joseph. Does my father live? His brethren could not answer him. And I can resonate. I can understand that. You're probably sitting there going, what in the world is going on? Are we dreaming? Again, they haven't said anything yet. Look at what's going on here. Chapter 44, tie it together with the beginning of 45. Judah goes through, this spiel there. We can't do this. We can't do this. We got to do what's right. We got to do what's right. We got to do what's right. The guy just starts wailing and wailing. And he says, everybody get out of here. And he says, I'm Joseph, your brother. And there's, what are you talking about? Who are you? How do you even know this? And he says, come near. He says, they were troubled at his presence. The concept is they were troubled. They were sort of frightened and like, well, I don't know, man. They were just amazed at what was occurring there. And they just, as you might imagine, they couldn't believe. They couldn't answer. They were dismayed. They were troubled. They were terrified. Wow, what is going on here? And in verse 4 he says, come near, I pray you. And they came near. He said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves that you sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. It's incredible the ways that he can see God is working, which we can too. It's a lot easier for me to see how God is working in somebody else's life, especially when it's some way that he might be working and they're going through kind of a time that's not so fun. It's a lot easier, God's working in your life. It's a little bit more difficult to see that when God's working in my life and I'm going through a hard time because we just want it to be over. I mean, most of us don't like going through pain and suffering of any sort, but he says, so we see he's clearly forgiven them here. However, he's forgotten it by all accounts, but he's also saying, don't be angry with yourself. He's telling them to forgive and forget as well. Of course, we know later on that they bring it up again here before the end of the book, but that's an important lesson that we might be able to get out of that in our dealings with people, is the idea of forgiving and forgetting. That's kind of the hard part. You can't ever totally forget things, but also encouraging them to do that as well. God did send me before you to preserve life. And a very important thing that God is always focused upon is preserving life. And he always desires that. And he has done that here. Of course, this in particular is very important because if this event doesn't happen, what happens to the family? Well, we don't know. They would most likely be scattered. What would they do? What would they eat? Would they survive? And we know God always has a plan. God always protects and brings out his plan as he desires for it to occur, though it doesn't always occur as we think it might or should or would want it to. And but he said, God did send me to preserve life. And for these 2 years, the famine's been in the land. Obviously, they know that. But he continues, which they obviously did not know this, because they're not Joseph and they're not God. So, but they would not have been told, there are 5 more years, and there will not be earing nor harvest. There's disagreement about exactly what earing is, whether or not that means, actually seeing the ear, or, but it's ear is, it states, is an Old English word for plowing. So most likely what they're dealing with here is seed time and harvest. There would be neither one of those. There is an account later on in Genesis where we find they come to get seed from Joseph, but that is also at the 7th year, the end of the year, so that could have been for the coming year. And it's also possible that there could have been some very minute planting along the very close lying areas of the Nile, though it would have produced a tiny harvest, but nothing substantial for anyone to be able to subsist off of. But be that as it may. But he tells him there's 5 years coming. So, we've 2 in, but we're really just starting. 5 more years. But he says, God sent me before you to preserve you, posterity in the earth, to save your lives by a great deliverance. And God has done this. He's always pointing them back to God and how God has worked. And that's an important concept, I think, at least for me, to understand, and how God's guided this. God has watched over. And we can often see that in retrospect. We can see that in retrospect and how, wow, after I went through that, I can see how God was working. But when I was going through it, it wasn't very much fun. And I really didn't know what was going on or how it was occurring. I just know I was kind of miserable at times. But hopefully as we go through more of those events, we can see, as we're going through it, how God might be working and guiding. And it might be even wise for us to say, I don't know how God's working in here or through this. I mean, it doesn't seem like anything's happening, but I know he is, because I'm submitted to him, and what he's doing, he is doing. And, but he sees this. Do you think Joseph, years and years and years, he's there in the, 12, 13 years he's in either slavery, servanthood there, or prison. From the time around he's about 17, 18 until he's about 30, he's, I don't think every single day of every night when he went to sleep, he's like, boy, this is just so wonderful that God is working for me to preserve my brothers in posterity. He couldn't have known everything that was going to occur. But he likely was saying, God, I don't know what you're doing, but here I am, and I guess you're doing something. I don't know exactly what it is, but we see in retrospect, and he sees it here now. He says, God sent me to preserve you, a posterity in the earth. And we know eventually, what are we all looking forward here at this point? Well, we're still looking forward to a Messiah. Ever since we get past Genesis 2, we're looking for a Messiah. And of course, we know that God knew from the very beginning, even before that, we were looking for the Messiah, because it was laid out before the earth was even created. And but that to save your lives by a great deliverance. Verse 8, so now it was not you that sent me here, but God. It's not you that did it. Don't think you're anything special. But God did it. And he made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his house and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. And it's thought that father of Pharaoh, it might be a title like prime minister or king or something to that effect. And, he's over. Prefects are sometimes called father. But we do know that father is one that protects give subsistence to those that are underneath. And he's given all authority here to hand out and to not hand out things that are needed. But he's a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt, and we still do not have a single word that they've said. We still don't know anything that they said since Judah got done. Since Judah got done in chapter 44, all we have here is, he closes, "How shall I go up to my father and the lad be not with me?" How can I go without Benjamin? I can't do that. It's impossible. And then they said, "I'm Joseph." And we don't have a single word that they've said yet. He's just unloaded on them. He starts crying immensely, weeping uncontrollably, very loudly, wailing immensely, more so than we can probably imagine in our American minds. He says, "I'm Joseph, you sold me in. This was horrible that you have done that, but God used it for good. He's preserved your life and your posterity of life, those that will come after you." And we know that also points to the Messiah. God did this. He has made me ruler over everything. I'm right here with Pharaoh over the whole world now. And they still haven't said it. They're still sitting there. Wow. I don't know what to say. They said they couldn't. All we know is they said they couldn't speak. Said that they were like, wow. They couldn't answer him. That's all we're told. He says, "Haste ye, and go up to my father, and say unto him, Thus saith thy son Joseph, God hath made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down unto me, and tarry not." There's a couple things that we see in that verse 9 is the urgency. It's quick. He's like, "Haste, hurry, go to my father. Tell him Joseph is ruler over all of Egypt. Not only have we found Joseph, but he's king of the world. And come down and do not tarry, do not wait. Hurry. Do this quickly." Again, a good principle for believers to have in their minds is to do things urgently and quickly, and to be about everything quickly, and not to be slack and lazy and waiting around for something to happen. Waiting around for something that's not. Sometimes we can desire to wait around for something to happen. We need to move urgently and quickly. We see that all throughout Scriptures, and especially when we have a message from God. And this is a very interesting message that they have. He says, "Go up to Father, say to him, Thus say Joseph's alive, he's ruler of the world." Don't wait. An important message there. We see that all throughout Scripture. When there's an important message, you hurry up and you give it. You hurry up and you give it. You don't withhold it. The shepherds weren't told to Now, if you feel like it, you can go down to town and you can tell people you've seen what has occurred. On Pentecost, Peter's not, he's, maybe we'll go out there next week and see what occurs, and maybe, what happens we'll see. No, they go urgently, and he tells them to do that as well. "Hurry up, do not tarry, and thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen, and thou shalt be near unto me, thou and thy children." And Goshen there is reportedly quite a large area for them to be able to subsist off of. I cannot remember the exact amount, but it was fairly fertile, best of the land, and though I do not have the source that told me what it was, but it's a good, large amount of land. "You shall be near to me, thou, thy children, thy children's children, thy flocks, thy herds, all that thou hast." Again, they still haven't said a word that we're told. "And there will I nourish thee, for there are yet 5 years of famine." Again, second time he's told him this. He's reiterating it to, "Lest thou and thy household and all that thou hast come to poverty." And, we don't want that to happen. So, "Behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin." Doesn't he have 11 brothers there? Again, Benjamin is special. He's different. I think again, it's just something that I think. It's not in Scripture that it says exactly what their family relationships were like, but we can see some of the conflicts that were there, and there has to be differences there when you have 4 mothers in the same house. And, we see differences when there's, quote, 2 mothers or 2 fathers or 2 of each or whatever the world wants to dream up. And usually that would be referred to in divorce and remarriage, but now it's referred to, I guess it would be referred to in homosexual marriage. Now you can get that, but the dysfunction within we've seen that through divorce and remarriage families, and we've also seen a little bit of that in homosexual marriage families, using those terms loosely, very loosely. Those are not biblical definitions, but world definitions. But we can see dysfunction there. Now, it's true there is dysfunction often in families that are one man and one wife together. Just because you do it like that doesn't mean there won't be dysfunction. But usually when we don't do it by God's plan, we're guaranteed dysfunction. Guaranteed. So exactly what they went through, we don't really know. But we do know Benjamin is special. And even when his brothers come the first time, if it would have been me, I would have said, well, who else you got? Who's back home? And they said, well, our father and our brother Benjamin, and one brother's not. And he said, bring brother Benjamin. I wonder why didn't he say bring father? He didn't say bring father. He said bring Benjamin. I want to see Benjamin. I don't know why he didn't do that. But he wanted to see Benjamin. That is for certain. But he says here, behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin. That is my mouth that speaketh unto you. They still haven't said a word. And ye shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt, all that you have seen. You shall make haste. Hurry. Hurry, do this quickly. Bring down my father hither. Bring him down here. He's finally getting his father down here. And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. And Benjamin wept upon his neck. So again, moreover, he kissed all his brethren and wept upon them. And after that, his brethren talked with them. I tell you, so it took, there no doubt, I can imagine, as we read this, you can get a little bit of a sense of it, but they're a little bit shell-shocked, no doubt, about what has occurred. And I think they were probably a lot shell-shocked by what had occurred. And totally in disbelief, troubled at his presence in verse 3, no doubt. And, what did they talk about? It's not told. It does not tell us what they talked about. We can only imagine. I can imagine there were a few I'm sorry's and how in the world did you become this powerful? And but he's already told them that God has done this. God has brought it to pass. God has been in control here. And indeed, we can take that away in our own lives as well. We can. And you're probably not going to become the Pharaoh, the father of Pharaoh. Though you may. I don't really know. God alone does. But the fame thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brethren are come. And it pleased Pharaoh well and his servants. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, say unto thy brethren, this do ye, lade your beast, go, and get unto the land of Canaan. Get you unto the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households, and come unto me, and I will give you the good of the land, and you shall eat the fat of the land. You have whatever you want. You got the good stuff. You can have it. But bring it, come unto me, and this is what it shall be. Verse 19, now thou art commanded. You have to do this. You are commanded. This do ye. Take the wagons out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come. Also regard not your stuff, for the good of all the land of Egypt is yours. He said. So he sends them. He sends moving trucks for them, and sends them down the road to their house. And he says, but don't really pack anything. You can have whatever you want here. I felt like that would be a nice thing to have sometimes. If you have to pack everything in your house and move it into a different place, that is a lot of work. And but he says, don't even worry about any of that. You don't have to, only pack what you want, sentimental stuff or whatever. But you don't have to bring your stuff. But you're commanded to do this. Bring your little ones and your wives in the wagons, so they have an easy trip. They can just ride there and bring your father, and come. And the good of the land of Egypt is yours. And the children of Israel did so. So Joseph gave them wagons according to the commandment of Pharaoh, and gave them provision for the way. To all them he gave each man changes of raiment, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of raiment. So again, a little bit different there. And to his father he sent after this manner: 10 asses laden with good things of Egypt, 10 she-asses laden with corn and bread and meat for his father by the way. So he sent his brethren away, and they departed, and he said unto them, see that you fall not out by the way. What most think that he's really saying there, and I'm often surprised that he didn't go, but what many think that he's saying there is, after you get on this trip and you start going, don't start reasoning amongst yourselves saying, this can't be real. It's a trap. He's going to kill us all. He's saying, don't fall out of the way. Don't lose your path. Don't lose where you're going. Make sure that you maintain where you're supposed to go. It was also stated to prevent his brethren from accusing one another of which one, because they could have done that. And maybe they did do that in the years after that, saying, it's really your fault. And some of them were definitely more at fault than others there. And also to prevent them from envying Benjamin for the favor being shown to him. And, he's saying, just don't fall out of the way. Maintain the path. Go there quickly. Do this quickly. Come back quickly. And they went out of Egypt, in verse 25. They came to the land of Canaan unto Jacob their father, and he told them, Joseph is yet alive. That would have been enough. That would have been, wow. Just the fact that Benjamin coming back is probably enough. They likely were a little longer than he would have liked. We know that they had a magnificent meal there that one evening. We know that then they were leaving, but then they were retained, and they would have been a little bit late right off the bat. But they come to the land of Canaan, to Jacob, and first of all, they're back. That's good. Benjamin's with them. That's great. And then they say Joseph is alive. That's incredible. And then he's governor of the land of Egypt. Now, I know you guys are lying. And how in the world? And Jacob's heart fainted. What I just said, for he believed them not. He said, there's no way. The heart fainted. Some would put that in as stopped beating for a little bit. Perhaps the news was so good it caused him to swoon for a little bit, and it's too good to be true. What would you think? What would you think if that occurred? If that happened? If your son you thought was dead for 20 years, he's alive, and he's governor of the land of Egypt. They told him all the words of Joseph, which he said unto them, and when he saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. Now some think that they're just using figures of speech here in verse 26. It's not that really big a deal. His heart doesn't really faint, but something serious is going on there, because it says he's also revived. And Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die. This is much. I've been multiplied. The great things here are wonderful, and I can die complete. It's okay now. This guy's, whatever you want to say, you got to say he's had a full life. He's had a full life, and an interesting one. And he says, I'll go and see him before I die. And the next chapter, chapter 46, leads into that. And we'll look a little bit next week at how he goes, but God doesn't really visit him and tell him to go. And many, many other times God did tell him, go here, okay, leave now, go there. He visits him here, he visits him there. But we don't get any occurrence of that occurring here. So maybe there was a little bit of trepidation as he was leaving. But that concludes chapter 45. Anybody got any comments they would like to share? Feel free to do so.
I think it's interesting how Joseph talks about God working with Joseph and Joseph not holding anything, but it also ties into a lot of stories in the Bible where people go through suffering, but God always has a purpose for the suffering. In the end, it always pays off in some way, and I think that can be applied in our own lives.
Oh, yeah.
How suffering goes about. God has a reason for it.
Yep, very good. Suffering occurs every day for somebody in an intense way, and probably more intense for somebody than you, always, no matter what it is usually. But yeah, God always has a purpose in that. And we need to, one thing we can definitely learn is we need to maintain that God is working through those and bringing about something good to happen through them.
Just like Joseph.
Yeah,